everyone, and welcome to the Home Church podcast. Here at Home Church, we believe that everyone needs Jesus and everyone needs a home, so we hope that you'll open your hearts and your mind as you hear the message today.
Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you're here with us. We've been having just a few Facebook chats and talks about different issues that are happening in our world, and specifically talking about racism. And we've been talking about how in our church, Becca and my dream is to have a church that not only looks like heaven, but feels like heaven, that it's heaven on earth, a family. And I'm blessed today to have some of our family here that are part of our First Nations community. And I am here simply to listen today. And I hope you listen as well, to hear some history, some story, but also hear what Jesus has done and story of healing. And so we got about 4 sections to go through today. And I hope it's a huge blessing to you. And I hope you stay with us through the whole time of hearing this. But today I have Des and Corey Williams with us. They're such great friends. We have the mother of all, Coco Rosina, who has been part of our church. How long have you been part of our church?
Over 20 years.
No, since
Probably 30.
Yeah, probably 1991.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have Anne Marie, who's Coco Rosina's daughter. We have Daniel, so we got 3 generations here. Daniel, who is Anne Marie's son, and Coco Rosina's Rosina's grandson. So we're just blessed to be together today, and we want to just talk about it. You know, at church we've been saying, like, Jesus went to Samaria. He had to go. And instead of going around the issues, we're choosing to talk about the issues. And so that's what we're doing today. So from now on, besides a few little going to the next questions, I'm the listener. And I'm so glad. Thank you so much for taking your time today. Coco Rosina, would you please talk to us about some of your childhood and some of the history?
Well, we grew up. We lived on a farm. Secure. We've been always church goers right from the day we were born.
Yeah.
And it was a secure, and all of a sudden, then we were told we had to go to residential school. That was, had no idea what it was. So my mom got us all ready and buy us clothes and then soon after that, a big truck, looked like a cattle truck, came in.
Wow.
There was a few children in there. Away we went. Had no idea where we were going to go. We arrived. This was in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan.
Okay. Yeah.
And your reservation, Mr. Wasis.
My reserve's called Mr. Wasis, means big child in Cree.
Okay.
And
how far did you go?
45 minutes?
45.
Okay.
No, about an hour, I think.
Were you from the reserve to the school? Yeah.
From the reserve to the school. Arrived in this big brick building and had no idea what it was. There's already boys and girls there, and to make it short, we were very abused. The meals were terrible. Sometimes we had to steal to survive. Classes. A lot of times I missed classes. I'll be put in the laundry for a whole day and to wash clothes and bedding. And then the next day I'll be in the sewing room or kitchen. And so I missed a lot of classes.
Wow.
This is how it was. And it was very, very bad. When my mom and dad finally came, I said, Mom, this is really bad. It's bad here, Mom. Take us home. I always remember my mom didn't answer. She had no say. We were put in there by the government, and though I was almost 7 years in residential school.
Wow.
I never went to high school. And when I got out, I was very angry. I hated the teachers, the principal that strapped us, and staff, supervisors. Anyway, when I got out, I was angry. But in order for me to go out in life, I had to do something. I've been Christian all my life. I had to forgive.
Wow.
And that was a breakthrough.
Wow. And when did that happen?
That was early 50s.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you're able to
Yeah.
be a mom to all today and love everybody.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was 6 years old, we started going to day school in reserve. My grandma used to look after us, and she had a big Cree syllabic Bible, and she used to read that to me.
Wow.
You know, what's wrong, and you shouldn't do the gossiping and all the bad things.
Right.
She taught me all that, and that stuck to me the rest of my life.
Wow.
6 years old. Before I went to residential school.
Wow.
That's what helped me a lot too. I prayed and.
Amazing. That is such a great. Go ahead, Emma.
I just wanted to touch base for people that don't understand. Residential schools were created in the late 1800s. So it was the mission to separate the child from the family, to try to assimilate them into the European culture with the settlers. And when Mom said they had to go, every reservation had an Indian agent that lived on the reservation. And it was usually a white man. And he, in the words of my dad, they were seen as gods. What they said went. They could overrule anything. So when my Cookham was summoned to the agent office, he told her, your girls are old enough to go to school. They're going to be picked up. They had no say. My Mushum, who was a tall, strong man, had to comply.
Wow.
So residential schools, you had to go. It wasn't a question. And when people say to get over it, you have to think of young children. First thing that happened to Mom, her hair was cut off. She was forbidden to speak Cree. If she saw her brothers on the other side of the lunchroom, they weren't allowed to speak.
Never.
Wow.
My grandparents couldn't visit Mom.
Even your brothers,
No, they were segregated.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so they
Boys on one side.
boys,
We didn't dare talk to my brother. I wasn't able to.
Yeah.
From a distance, we learned to do our alphabet by hand.
Oh wow.
I'd have to A, B,
to
B,
sign to
C,
them.
D,
Oh wow.
E, F, G. We had to talk like that.
Yeah.
He'd be listening to me and I'd be doing my.
The last residential school to close in Canada
Mhm.
was 1996.
Wow.
in Saskatchewan.
So that's the last time, and like they were talking, it was government enforced, and a lot of the smaller reserves that they would swoop in and knock on the door and then just grab the kids and put them in the back of a cattle truck. So in this day and age, Pastor Jachin, if someone was to do that to you and take your kids, how would you feel? And take them and teach them a
even
different
imagine.
culture, a
Right.
different language, that if they spoke English, that they would get whipped,
Right.
and all that, and so we've got one here, and my mother went, my dad went, my grandparents went to residential
Wow.
school, and as she was saying, there was a lot of hatred there, and from that, as a result of that, my parents and a lot of those generations didn't know how to show love to their kids.
No.
Wow.
It took me, my mother passed away in 2016. 2013 is the year that she said, I love you back.
Wow.
So the impact of residential schools wasn't just during those years. It continued on
Right.
in the lives.
Yeah.
And my uncle, there's over 6,000 children that died in residential schools, and one of them was mom's brother. And the one thing is, we believe he cut his own hair before he went to school, and my auntie still has his braid to this day.
Wow.
And when my musherman or Cookham were told to come pick up Uncle Roland's body, they said he fell down the stairs, but his body was covered in bruises as if beaten, and there was nothing they could do.
Wow.
So everything was out of their hands, even their own blood
Wow.
was out of
there's
their hands.
A lot of them died in residential schools.
Wow.
So for mom to sit here to say
Right.
that she chose to forgive, that is like bondage broken, that is chains broken.
I was
That's
free. I felt
yeah.
free, and
That's rare. Yeah, really rare for someone to do
Only Jesus can do that.
that. Exactly.
Only Jesus can do that.
Yes.
That's right.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for sharing this. I mean, this is really, you know, as you know, someone who just grew up, and when I grew up here, it was really mostly a white community, and you know, honestly, grew up not even knowing some of these things until you know, my father was adopted by the Pegani, the North Medford and Daniel North
Pagan.
Pagan, and,
Yeah.
and then I started to hear some of the some of the history and some of the story, right?
The Blackfoot. That's their
And this
tribe.
is Blackfoot land
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
In fact, I was talking with Uncle Manfred last week, and you know, we were talking about some of the COVID thing and how Red Deer hasn't had much COVID, and he says that's because we were on his land and he's been praying.
Right on.
Which is wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Corey, before we go to a different subject, you want to share some of the things that
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on, so Rosina had residential schools, so then you have to imagine the generations of parents that came out of that. Like Des was saying, they didn't know how to love, they didn't know how to raise children, they didn't know how to be a family after they left the schools. When they were in the schools, like there was sexual assault, you know, there was beating, starvation, like anything, like you would not be able to survive from that. So now you have these people coming out of the residential schools and starting a family, right? And they're drinking, they're using drugs just to cover that pain up. So my story is, I'm actually a product of the 60s group. So the government failed to assimilate, or thought they failed, decided that now they're going to take all children that were born and place them into white homes to try and assimilate us again.
Oh, wow.
So my story, like I met my biological family about 7 years ago. My biological mom said that when I was born, the social workers told her that I would be placed into foster care just because she was having a hard time with her addiction and stuff. And she's like, okay, I'm going to have time to get on my feet. You know, I'm going to be able to be a parent. But in the same breath, what the Alberta government did was already have a family lined up, and I was adopted right out of the hospital.
Wow.
So I was taken from my mom and placed into adoption right away.
Wow.
Without her even knowing. Right? So that's where I have a lot of conflict, because I was raised in an amazing Christian home.
Wow.
You know, like I was blessed.
Yes.
And I know for myself that I struggle, and I still struggle, finding my identity, right? I'm First Nations, but I don't fit in with that group. I'm white on the inside, but you know, when I'm associated with them, I look First Nations. So I've always kind of like put it as I walk in both worlds
Wow.
really well. And I still look for my identity at times.
Right.
I know, like, I struggled a lot with anger. I was so angry because I didn't know where I fit in, right? And I'd fill it with all kinds of crazy things through my 20s.
Wow.
Like, I am surprised that I'm still here because God definitely had, you know, a hand in my life to, you know, I have a purpose,
Yes.
right?
Well, even as
And
you're telling me that story, I'm thinking, wow, God's got such a purpose for you.
right?
And he's already using you in it.
Absolutely. And so, like, you kind of know why we came back here our second time, just because we really want to be rooted. Like, we love you, we love the church, we love what this church is doing. So we moved back again. And I think it was our one small group. What was that book we were doing? Love
Like You've Never Been Hurt.
That was the hardest small group I ever had to do in my whole life. And that was when I finally just let it go and I forgave everything. And like, when you say that bondage just breaks,
Wow.
like, you just feel like a brand new person. Like, all those chains that fall off is just amazing. And you just can walk knowing that you have forgiven what has been keeping you down for all these years, right?
Wow.
So
Just want one of you to maybe speak to something that's just kind of come up that I wasn't expecting. But, you know, I think oftentimes it doesn't matter, you know, what people group it could be, but when it comes to First Nations people, people have heard stories of addictions and things, and then it becomes you know, it becomes almost like put on everybody.
Yeah.
I don't have the right terminology, forgive me, but and because a lot of people don't know the history, but also just because we don't have enough compassion. Nobody asks the question, why are people struggling? You know, and maybe one of you just wants to speak to that, because I think that's a big deal.
Generational trauma,
right?
As a result of residential schools, the 60s scoops, what the government did. The main purpose of residential schools was to kill the Indian, take our culture, take our language, and abolish it all, and learn European ways.
Right.
And as a result of that, they almost succeeded, but nowadays there is a lot more people getting sober. Right. And in First Nations culture, they call it the Red Road.
Yeah.
There's a lot more people on the Red Road now. There's a lot more people being educated. There's a lot more people going to college and getting those degrees and getting their bachelors and becoming doctors and lawyers.
Good.
Because the generational trauma is being broken.
Yes.
Yeah.
The generational curses are being broken. And for them to further ado, it comes back to Rosina here talking about forgiveness. And that is what I was taught younger from my grandmother and her sisters was, don't hold grudges ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Forgive.
Yeah.
Always forgive.
So wonderful.
That's right.
And that's a result of it is the alcoholics and drug addicts in the First Nations world is the generational trauma from residential schools.
Yeah.
We never had alcohol before Europeans showed up.
And I think it's good for people to hear this and know this, so that instead of when they see someone with an issue or even make a friend with someone and find out they have a problem, that they have compassion.
Yeah.
Right? And that we would have bigger hearts of compassion and see the need, see the hurt and heal.
Right.
Bring a healing, right?
Yeah, so I'm a frontline worker, so I always worked with like very vulnerable, you know, people. And when I was working in this one shelter, and watching, you know, the people I'm working with be like, you know what, Corey, like, you're like the last person that would smile at me or just ask me how I'm doing. You know, just to have that compassion just for that person and just, you know, it's just the best thing you can do for someone that's struggling,
So good.
right?
Yeah.
Anne-Marie,
Yes.
I want to ask you because Des kind of touched on something, and we had talked about it previously, just about what you want for Daniel,
Yes.
and how Daniel is an amazing athlete
Yes.
and a great student, and right, yeah. And just an awesome young man.
Yeah.
But you have certain things that you're wanting for him,
Yes.
as far as like you're wanting to pass down a lot of different things to him.
Right.
Would you just explain some of the things that are in your heart that you want him to be passed down?
One thing is he has learned a lot of our history through my mom and my dad. And I want him, because my mom is Cree, is full Cree from Saskatchewan, and my dad is Iroquois from the Six Nations Reserve in Ontario.
Okay.
So he's blessed with 2 tribes.
Wow.
And of
That's
course
so
his
awesome.
Kiwi side
You're right.
from his daddy.
From his dad. 'Cause
Yeah. So he's a blessed boy, but he has learned so much, I'd say, in the past 2 years, the history of what my parents went through.
Right.
I want him to know who he is, first and foremost, who he is in Christ.
Yes.
He is a child of God.
Yes.
He is blessed. He is protected. He has the love of Christ in him that he can exude to all. Doesn't matter the race.
Yeah.
So in our home, the one thing I learned from my parents and my dad, especially, love all
of all people.
white, Spanish,
Yeah.
Filipino, the Black
Wonderful.
community. We were raised that way. You love everybody, you respect everybody. We want respect, and that's one thing my dad taught me as an Aboriginal girl. You know, you respect others, and we ask for respect back, you know. And my dad taught me not to, you know, fall down, you know, stand up
So
for
good.
myself. So Daniel's learning his heritage from both sides of the tribes.
Yeah.
And
And the Kiwi side.
the Kiwi side, like the
The
Marmite.
rugby.
Yeah.
The rugby is in there.
Yeah. So Daniel, he has had moments when he has heard stories of mom and what his grandparents went through on both sides. And Daniel has gotten emotional. Daniel has gotten mad, and he has gotten angry. And I said, you have to do what your grandparents did, and that is to forgive and to move on, because mom broke out of that, I broke out of that, and Daniel's not going to live in that.
Amen.
So good.
So he knows who he is in Christ, and he also accepts his culture, and he respects his culture, and that's my goal. You know,
That's
know
so
who you
wonderful.
are. You know where your ancestors came from. Know your land. Know the history. Right?
Yeah.
And it's been hard for him because, as I think back in 2019 in lacrosse,
Yeah.
Daniel started getting the racial slurs. He used to have nice long hair. He would get his hair pulled.
Yep.
Right.
And he would get sworn at, and it was hard.
Yeah.
And it was hard for me as a parent. My parents went through it harshly. I went through it, but to see our child in
go through it.
2019 go through racial, thinking, wow, it's still happening,
Oh yeah.
and it's hard. It's devastating.
Daniel, is there anything you want to share about that? Like,
Yes.
is that surprising to you that, you know, that is still happening today? Or?
Well, when you look at the past, it was never really dealt with back then. It was overlooked. But now that happened to George Floyd, it's getting back here. People are looking into it. People are trying to deal with it. But you can't just deal with it right away. It's a long process. Heck, we probably not get it rid this year. It could take
Right.
many years.
Right.
And like this generation's my cookum, up to here, it's still happening.
Right.
You can't just stop it like that.
Right.
You just have to keep on forgiving and just keep on living and know who you are in Christ.
So good. So
And
proud of you.
it's hard for him, you know.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you have to do it. Like we say we forgive, but we have to forgive daily.
Right.
We have to keep moving forward and say, oh, something's coming up. I'm starting to get angry. No, I'm just giving it to God.
Right.
You know, I'm choosing to move forward.
Mhm.
And then his children will be blessed and so forth.
That's right. I know this isn't what most people want to talk about. So if you're thinking this is already too cringy for me, well, just wait a minute and stay with us. But maybe a couple of you would just share. You know, don't feel like you have to share anything. But I know you've experienced. Like I know even what your mom just shared wasn't even the reality of the words that were said and the things that were done.
Yeah, that's just the outer shell,
That-
but you have to think of your heart inside.
That's right. And I know those weren't even the words that were said.
Oh, way more.
Way more,
Yeah,
right? And so like
unfortunately,
that was the general, that was the G-rated
Yes.
version
Yeah.
Yeah.
of what was really said and
Mhm.
really done. And you know I've said this in church, but I say it to you again. There's no room for racism in our world
No.
today.
Yeah.
And there's no room, especially and in our church, but in the church,
Yeah.
there's no
Mhm.
room.
Right.
We are all equal before God.
Amen.
But I do want some of you to just share quickly. You know, I know, Des and Corey, I know that you have faced racism, even delivering flyers for
Mhm.
block party. You know, going out in the community doing nice things to serve people. And I don't know, you don't feel like you have to share anything particular, but
Well, I have a couple, I
Yeah.
guess.
yeah, no, you just share because you know what?
Um,
People need to know that this is still happening.
It is still happening.
Yeah.
I've been dealing with a health issue for about 9 months now, right?
Yeah.
And I know that every time I go to the hospital, I'm automatically categorized as I'm either faking it to get the drugs or I'm just an Indian that's an alcoholic. And I don't get the care that you would get when
Wow.
you would go into the hospital into emergency.
Wow.
So I have to fight. I have to be my own advocate. This past couple weekends, I actually almost lost my life. Right? It was really scary that weekend. And I know God placed my family doctor in my life for a reason. He actually came to my room that weekend and he was like, you know what, Corey? He's like, you should never have been treated this way. And there's actually some remarks on my medical record that he's going to fight with me to get expunged,
Yes.
like erased, stricken from my medical records. So that's just one thing.
Right.
Another one, I know that
But
really.
how often, Des, you can just tell me, but like how often I don't know, because I've never asked you this, but like how often in a month would you face someone
A few times.
a few times a month
and,
would be like a full racial slur
yeah.
against you?
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah,
like,
you get called some pretty wild names. It's from what I've experienced, it's the older generations, the 70-year-olds,
right.
you know, that'll say it as you walk by, and then you look back and you're like, "Excuse me,"
Right.
and they'll just continue to walk
Right.
just so they can get it out of their mouth.
Wow.
And it
And-
doesn't even have to be words.
Yeah.
We see the body
The
language.
body language.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll hold their purses a little tighter.
Yeah.
They'll walk further away from us.
People look at me if I go into a store, some friends, or if I have a bag
Right?
and I'm by somebody, and then they'll come near me.
Yeah, they'll follow us around the store to make sure we're not stealing anything.
And the one sad thing that makes me sad in 2020, I've had to talk to Daniel in this past while. If you are out and I'm not with you and Dad's not with you, if something is happening to you and there's a racial conflict, whether it's with an adult, a group of kids, I said, get your phone out and record it.
Exactly.
I said, if you can't record it, get one of your friends to record it, because that's how we have to protect ourselves.
Right.
And
And
Daniel
it's
has,
a
yeah,
sad society for us to tell our kids that.
yeah.
Right.
Since the whole pipeline issues come up this
Mhm.
past winter,
Yeah.
the comments I've read is disgusting And then with the whole George Floyd killing, and everybody's like, there is no racism in Canada.
Right.
Oh, please go back to November, December, January,
Mhm.
and you read everybody's comments on social
Sure.
media from then. Run the protesters over, kill them, get rid of them. They don't belong here. That's what people were writing. Those same people that wrote those things
Right.
are the ones now saying racism is not alive in Canada. And just the issues, like she was saying, we have to, since then and beforehand, I've been praying for my kids, my grandchildren, not to experience
Right.
racism
Yes.
on the levels I have. She has, Rosina, anybody.
Right.
It kicks you down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I've done oil patch work. The guy staying in my room comes back. You effing chug, what are you doing?
Yeah.
How do you sleep?
Right.
Yep.
And these are things that are happening
Yeah.
even
And
today.
you can't report it, because then if you report it, you're going to lose your job.
Right.
Mhm.
So that's the one thing we need to educate. I'm really, my hope and my prayer is that in the schools, in the Catholic schools, in the public school system, at Destiny, let's get our history in the curriculum. Not because we want sympathy,
Right.
but because I
Because
want.
it's the same history, or it deserves the same history as every other
Right.
part of history.
And we're living in Canada. Let's know the history of the land.
Mhm.
And I just want to say one thing I love about New Zealand. Their Aboriginal
Mm-hmm.
people are the Maoris, and they are integrated in the society. They are not on reservations. They have their maraes, but they go there for celebrations, for funerals, a gathering. But they are in society. And my first time in New Zealand, I was so happy to see so many brown people on the street.
Yeah.
I was like, hey, cuz, I was so happy. And that's
Yeah.
what we need in Canada.
That's so
There,
awesome.
it's in their curriculum. All students of all races are learning the Maori language. They invite other cultures to do the haka,
Yeah.
you know,
Which is
so
the dance that
which
they
is
do
the
before
dance. They try to intimidate you
Yeah,
before
it's so
rugby.
good.
So New Zealand has got it right.
Mhm.
What they did with the Maori people, and that's my goal here. Is like I would love to see that here.
That's
You
wonderful.
know, just to know the history.
Exactly.
Just to know. And the big thing right now is the statues coming down
Mm-hmm.
and all that. But let's talk about our first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald,
Mhm.
and all of his words. He wanted the savages off this land. He tried to starve our people.
He
Wow.
purposely gave a certain tribe blankets that were infested with a disease at that time. The whole tribe wiped out in a matter
Wow.
of weeks,
Yeah.
and nobody cared about it. It was just overlooked.
Yeah.
Wow.
So let's just know our history. And we're not, like I said, we're not doing it for sympathy, but
Right.
let's
No.
just know
Well,
what.
Recognition and whatnot of what we've gone through, and you know, it's
And-
generational trauma and stress and everything else
Yeah.
that we've come through.
And so, you know, there's no way we're going to get through everything
No,
in this
no.
little conversation, but
Yeah.
this has been so helpful, I believe. This is helpful for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's helpful for so many people hearing. Just thank you so much for your stories.
Mhm.
But I want to end with, where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Where do we go from here? I think you just gave us one example
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
of over in New Zealand of
Yeah.
maybe a picture of what we could aim
Yeah.
towards.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But where do we go from here, Anne-Marie?
Where do we go from here? That's a good question. That's a big question. And I think,
And what could, like, if you were going to say to me, Pastor, this is what we need from you, and this is what we need from other white people, white leaders, or and even if you want to just go every person, like
Yeah,
just go.
every
This is what we need
person.
from everybody. What would you say?
Respect.
Respect. There you
and
go.
just when Pastor Jachin gives us so much respect, we walked into the church today. We were so welcomed.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
you know, hugs. Oops, I mean, elbow taps. We're so welcomed in this church, and I think that's my prayer is for Aboriginal people. Like I said to you before, we have Aboriginal people that are Christians,
Right.
and we have Aboriginal people that go the traditional way.
Right.
And there's a division there. And I want Aboriginal people to know that God is for every nation, every tribe, every tongue. And that is one division that needs to be broken.
Yeah.
And that's my prayer, is that people can see God is for them, not against them. And unfortunately, the churches and the government did not help. So that's where that strife comes in. And that's, I think, when we acknowledge what land we're on right now. We're on Treaty 6 land. Correct?
Treaty 6-7.
Treaty 6-7. Right?
And what does that mean? You have to tell me. Because I hear from, Manfred that it's Blackfoot.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there actually Red
So
Deer
explain that to me.
is like really, really interesting. So it was like a meeting point
Yeah.
where
Okay.
everybody would come and meet for meetings and stuff.
Wow.
So Treaty 7 would say, okay, well, part of Red Deer is our part. And then Treaty 6 would be like, oh, well, this other like north end of the river is our part. And then Treaty 8, where I'm from Edmonton down, like, we would all meet here in Red Deer, I guess. So it's just all different parts of like wherever parts of like Alberta. And
Sure.
And that's what the
Treaties.
government gave
Yeah.
us.
Mhm.
We have treaties.
Yeah.
And that's what the government had created way back in the 1800s. And now we're recognizing the lands that are Treaty 6, 7, 8. Yeah.
There's so much to learn in that. And even when you're talking, I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense. Like, Red Deer is a meeting place. isn't it?
Right. So I just wanted to, like, you were asking, like, what
Yep.
can we do?
Yep.
Right. So Anne Marie was saying, like, well, definitely in the schools, but we can start at home.
Very good.
What are we doing in our own home
Yep.
to talk about racism?
Yep.
Yes.
Like, how are we raising our children, our next
Yep.
generation? How are we talking about the First Nations people of Alberta? Like, how do we act? Right? And then it's like a level. So then you, Pastor Jay, what can you do? So like, yeah, we have our church.
Yep.
What other platform can you go on to start speaking about it? Right?
Yeah.
Who can we, start speaking on this? Like, who can we open it up to?
Well, even this is a beginning.
Right? It is definitely a beginning.
Because who knows what God would bring, but you can do with what you have.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
I think that's the message that everyone needs to hear, is that everyone needs to take responsibility
Mhm.
in their own life, with their own family,
Yeah.
with their own children.
We do too, as First Nations,
Yes.
need to take responsibility, because I know sometimes we will get caught up in that racism kind of thing outwards towards the white people. And then I'll be like, hey, babe, no, we got to stop now. We have to repent. We can't go down that road.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say, even from this conversation, I think it's so courageous of you all, because as much as we know Jesus, has paid for our debts and
Yes.
saved us and everything like that, still the power of forgiveness is really in our hands, in
Yes.
your hands.
Yeah.
And because you guys have chosen that,
Mhm.
it's enabled you to walk
Mhm.
in healing.
Yeah.
And I just honor you all for walking in healing.
Mhm.
And
Thank you.
and as a white person, like, I guess one of the things that's interesting for me is, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm asking, but like, should I be saying sorry for
No.
the generations
No.
past,
No.
or
No.
these things? But I think what's, and I love just hearing that back, because it's like, you don't know what to do. But I think what we can do, and we're in this series called United, and it's Jesus who says, love one another as
Yes.
I have loved
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
And we can start there.
Yes.
And I just want to, just as we conclude here today, I just want to encourage everyone that's watched, and I hope it's been a blessing to you. I hope it's been enjoyable. Hope you've learned some things, but out of everything that's been said, I hope that it causes you to walk towards a friend that maybe you don't have yet, and causes you to just share and give love and show appreciation and have a heart that's full of compassion. And I believe God can use that in incredible ways. And I pray for our church, because when everything started to happen and all of the we're in the middle of a pandemic, and then all of a sudden we're in our middle of a racial tension. I told Anne Marie, first person I called was TK. Yeah. And second person I called was my Uncle Manford, who I just wanted to call and just talk to somebody. Because because as everything was happening, I was going, I would love to have a church that was full of First Nations people that felt like they could be home with me and Becca and with our church. That's what I would love to see. And I also, one of the first thoughts I had, and I talked about this with Manfred, was, even when we're talking about the black and white issues, I feel in Canada that the First Nations issue is our I don't know if you have a greatest sin, but it is the thing that we need mended. And so I want to thank you all for sharing out of your heart today. And I pray this is a blessing to everybody who watched. Rosina, would you end us in a prayer today? And you're welcome to pray in your native tongue or in English or both.
I'll do it in my native tongue.
Wonderful. Please do. Please do.
No tawinan, excuse me. No tawinan kichikisagok. No tawinan means our God. No tawinan kichikisagok ayin kamatoy tawang kuihon. Kawis pa no taski kay jetamen. Kasino muna kamats dito temak. Kami namaste kapi akota. Kami umantoneta mak. Kami upmatsiak. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for listening to the Home Church podcast today. We hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure you press subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you'd like, we'd love for you to rate and review our podcast so that other people can hear the impactful message that you just heard.